Christianity says that God came here and became a human being just like we are, and that's what we see in Jesus. But we believe that God did not just come here just for the sake of doing it. God came here in order to do something, to accomplish something. Now today is Palm Sunday in Christianity. This coming Thursday will be what's called Maundy Thursday. Friday is Good Friday. And then a week from today will be Easter. And this is known as Holy Week within Christianity. And this is seen as the most important week in Christianity because the events we commemorate during this week are marking the most important thing God came here to do. And that is the defeat of death. And this is the process by which death is defeated. And so today I thought it would be interesting to recap the events that will be commemorated today and through this week. Now Palm Sunday marks the time when Jesus arrived in Jerusalem. And that started a chain of events that would result in him being killed. He would arrive in Jerusalem on Sunday, he would be arrested on Thursday, and he would be crucified on Friday, and then on Sunday he would rise from the grave. So him going to Jerusalem started the chain of events that would result in him being killed. And it's important to think about exactly why and how him going to Jerusalem resulted in that. Now, for about 3 years prior to this, Jesus had been going around Galilee, healing the sick and teaching. Now, Galilee was a different land than the land around Jerusalem. The land around Jerusalem was in, we'd call it a country today, Judah. And then north of Judah was a place called Samaria. And then north of that was Galilee. Now, Jesus was born in Bethlehem down in Judah. But remember, Mary and Joseph were just there for a purpose. And then they left and went to Nazareth. That is in Galilee. And that's where Jesus grew up. And so when the Gospels pick up with what's called the public ministry of Jesus, when the Gospels begin, we see Jesus living in a town called Capernaum, and that is also in Galilee. And so Jesus was not a Judean, Jesus was not a Samaritan, Jesus was a Galilean. And that's very important to realize. Now, we've talked in here before when we've talked about Old Testament history, how when at the death of King Solomon in the Old Testament, the kingdom of the Hebrews split into two parts, Judah in the south and Israel in the north. And we've also talked about how in the 700s BC, the kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians, and the people of Judah just sort of wrote them off. If you read the Old Testament, you'll see that after the Israelites were conquered by the Assyrians, they just drop out of the Bible. They're not mentioned anymore. And from that point on, it's all about Judah and the Judeans. And of course, that's Jews. Judah, Judean, Jews. And so the Jews felt that God had disowned the people of Israel because they were not doing what he wanted them to do. And the Jews began to feel that they alone, not the people of Israel, were God's people. Now, oddly enough, when we get to the New Testament, what used to be Israel and the Israelites is referred to as Samaria and the Samaritans. So Jesus was from Galilee, which was north of Samaria. And the people of Judah, remember, thought God had disowned everybody but them. And although there were a few Jews living in Galilee at that time, the Jews in Judea did not consider them to be real Jews. They considered them foreigners and followers of a pagan religion. Archaeological discoveries have showed that Galilee was composed of primarily Roman and Greek influences. It was not a Jewish land, and even the people of partial Hebrew heritage who lived there did not practice Judaism as it was practiced down south in Judah around Jerusalem. In the words of one scholar, the Judaism practiced by the Galileans was a half-pagan fringe form of Judaism. And some scholars say that since Jesus was a Galilean, it is a mistake to even refer to him as Jewish, because the Jews in Judah would not have considered him to have been Jewish. So Jesus actually was a Galilean, not a Judean. Rather than growing up and spending his childhood as a practicing Jew, which everybody's taught in Sunday school, that's what Jesus was, it's probably more accurate to say that the religion Jesus grew up in bore little, if any, resemblance to the religion that was practiced around Judea and Jerusalem. And keep that in mind, because that's going to be one of the keys to the crucifixion. So Jesus grew up in Galilee, and as an adult he spent about 3 years traveling around Galilee, healing the sick and teaching. The Gospels tell us that Jesus was extremely popular. His reputation preceded him, and everywhere he went, people thronged around him. Now, the people loved Jesus, but he always ran afoul of the religious leaders. From what the Gospels tell us, everywhere he went, the religious leaders criticized him and were against him. And Jesus was against them too. Jesus reserved his strongest criticism for the religious leaders. In fact, if you read through the Gospels, it may surprise you to see that the religious leaders are about the only people Jesus ever criticized. He didn't have a lot of criticism for other people, only the Jewish religious leaders. Now, for some reason, when Jesus was up in Galilee, he decided he needed to go to Jerusalem. And no one knows why. The Bible doesn't tell us why he decided to go. It only says that he did. And biblical scholars have argued about that, and there's speculation about why did he want to go to Jerusalem. No one knows. But he set out to go. His 12 disciples went with him, and from the gospel accounts we knew that there was a fairly large crowd of people that traveled around with him, including a fairly large group of women. And they were on their way to Jerusalem. That would have been about an 80-mile journey, a little farther than from here to Asheville. And it would have taken about 3 days of solid walking if you just walked, normal. But that's not how Jesus made the journey. We see Jesus stopping in every little town and village along the way, doing the same thing he was doing in Galilee. He's healing the sick and he's teaching. And the same thing happened there that happened in Galilee. He was hugely popular. His reputation preceded him. And every time he entered a town, people heard he was coming and they ran out to greet him. And so they ran out and thronged around Jesus. We've talked in here before. It wasn't but a couple of weeks ago we talked about how Jesus was on a lake and there were so many people crowded around him. He had to get out on a boat and get out in the water to keep them from pressing up against him so much. Just like happened in Galilee when he was headed toward Jerusalem. Every time he went into a town, people came to greet him. And just like happened in Galilee, every time he went into town, he got into conflict with the religious leaders. We do not know how long it took Jesus to make the journey from Galilee to Jerusalem, but we do know that when he got to Jerusalem, the response there was just like it was in all the other towns along the way. People heard he was coming, and they ran out to greet him. And it says that they spread palm branches out in front of Jesus as he was coming into town. And that's why it's called Palm Sunday. People heard Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, and just like they did everywhere, they came out to greet him, and they used palm branches. One of the first things Jesus did when he got to Jerusalem is go up to the temple, and he drove out the sellers of birds and the money changers from the temple. Now, birds were sold there because they were used in some kind of sacrifice rituals outside the temple. No one knows what the money changers were, and nobody knows why the money changers were there. That's not explained. It's just stated. Nobody knows why they were there. But Jesus comes in and he runs all those people off. Now just imagine the reaction of the Jewish leaders. Here comes some guy who's not from here. He's a Galilean. They don't even consider him a Jew. They consider him to be from some other religion. And he comes up to the temple and he starts creating havoc up there. How would we feel if people did that in churches today? That's how they felt. And so things in Jerusalem, but the religious leaders got off on the wrong foot, and from there they only got worse. Because Jesus stayed around the temple teaching, and when he was teaching, he made it a point to criticize the religious leaders. He told the people, don't pay these religious leaders any attention. He called them vipers, sons of hell. Told them they didn't understand the Scripture. Told them they did not know God. You could imagine why these people did not like Jesus. An outsider. Here comes some foreigner in here, this Galilean, telling them they were completely wrong. Trying to turn all the people against them. Now this went on for several days. And tensions escalated between Jesus and the Jewish leaders. And they met and they said, okay, we got to get rid of him. But we can't just go grab him because everybody loves him. If we go out there and just grab him, people will mob us. They'll protect him. So they wanted to find out some way they could get Jesus secretly without crowds of people knowing about it. Now one of Jesus' disciples, a man named Judas Iscariot, heard that the Jewish leaders were trying to figure out a way to get Jesus. And so he approached them and said, I can make this happen for you. And they were thrilled. And so they paid him money to help them get their hands on Jesus in secret at night. Now, it just so happened that the Jewish Passover was coming up. The Passover was an annual celebration in Jerusalem and Judea. That harkened back to when God helped the Hebrew people leave slavery in Egypt under Moses. And it was commemorated mainly by eating a special kind of meal. And 3 of the Gospels tell us that Jesus and his disciples intended to eat a Passover meal. 2 Gospels tell us that they borrowed a room where they could eat. And then there is a scene in 2 Gospels where Jesus took a piece of bread, broke it, gave it to the disciples and said, "This is my body." He took a cup and gave it to them to eat and said, "This is my blood." And in 1 Gospel, he told them that every time they did this, they should do it in his remembrance. Now during this meal, Judas gets up and goes out. He goes out and tells the Jewish leaders where they can find Jesus and how they can get to him secretly without anyone knowing about it. Now there is some confusion about this meal that Jesus ate with his disciples. It is the precursor to what we know as communion. But we do not know whether that was a Passover meal or not. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke seem to indicate that that was a Passover meal. The Gospel of John, though, makes clear that it was not. Because the Gospel of John says that the day they ate this meal was not the day the Passover would have been served. In fact, it indicates on into John that the day Jesus was crucified or the next day would have been the actual date of the Passover. The Gospel of Mark says nothing about a Passover meal. It indicates that the disciples made preparations to eat it, but does not identify this meal as a Passover meal. Now, I've said this before, but I think it bears repeating. Anytime something is not clear in the Bible, do not make an assumption about it. It is not clear whether Jesus ate a Passover meal with his disciples or not. So we just have to say, we don't know, and not draw any conclusions. I've heard people make a big deal out of saying that Jesus ate a Passover meal with his disciples. the Gospels are not clear on that. In fact, the Gospel of John clearly indicates it was not. So, did Jesus eat a Passover meal with his disciples? We cannot say he did. We cannot say he didn't. So we just move on from there and leave that an open question. Now, after this, Jesus and 11 of his disciples went to the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives was a mountain right outside of Jerusalem called the Mount of Olives because supposedly at that time it was all planted in olive trees. And right there was a little garden called the Garden of Gethsemane. And it was a place where people could go, I guess you could think of it as like a park type thing. You could go there and just be alone and be in private. And remember, Judas had gone to tell the Jewish leaders where they could find Jesus, and all of a sudden here comes Judas with the mob that the Jewish leaders sent to get Jesus. Now, one gospel, the Gospel of Luke, reports that Simon Peter was standing there and he had a sword, and he took that sword out and cut off the ear of one of the high priest's slaves. Jesus told Peter to put his sword away, and he healed that man's ear. So the mob takes Jesus to the house of the high priest, and the disciples get scared and they all run away. And then Simon Peter decides he's going to follow at a distance. So he follows at a distance, and he ends up standing in the courtyard of the high priest's house. And there's a bunch of other people in there standing there warming themselves by a fire. And some people come up and ask Simon Peter, said, I think I recognize you. You were with Jesus. Oh, no, I wasn't. No, I wasn't. That happened 3 times. And then after the 3rd time, a rooster crowed. And Peter had told Jesus earlier that he would follow him even to death if necessary. And Jesus had told him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And after the 3rd time, the rooster crowed. And the Bible says that Peter went out and wept bitterly. So Jesus was taken before the religious leaders, and they were demanding that he be killed. They sent him to Pilate, and they told Pilate, we want this man killed. Pilate recognized Jesus had done nothing wrong, that the Jewish leaders were just jealous of him. And he said, I don't see anything wrong. But the Jewish leaders were insistent. Now, when Pilate found out that Jesus was actually a Galilean, he thought he had found a way out, because Pilate was ruler of Judea. Another man, a man named Herod, was ruler of Galilee, and Herod just happened to be in Jerusalem for some reason then. And Pilate thought, okay, I'll just send him over to Herod and pass the buck. Herod sent him right back to Pilate. So Pilate had to make the decision. Pilate's wife had had a dream, and she said that it was very disturbing. In that dream, she said Jesus was innocent and that Pilate should have nothing to do with it. And she sent a message to Pilate saying that. But the Jewish leaders were very clever. They said, we are followers of Caesar. And if you were a follower of Caesar, you would have this man killed. They waved the patriotic flag, In the meantime, the Jewish leaders had assembled a crowd and had stirred up the crowd to ask for Jesus' crucifixion. And Pilate kept telling them, no, he's done nothing wrong. No, he's done nothing wrong. But they kept stirring it up. And finally, to keep the peace, Pilate said, well, I'll hand him over to you, but his blood will be on you. And they said, fine. His blood can be on us and on our children. And Pilate handed Jesus over, and in one scripture account it says, for them to do as they wished. So they took Jesus out to a place to be crucified. There were 2 other people crucified at the same time, 2 criminals. Jesus was placed on a cross in between them. When he was hanging on the cross, the Jewish leaders came by and made fun of him and laughed at him. And we're told that there was a crowd standing there. Apparently people just came to those things just It was just something to do, I guess. We are also told that some of Jesus' followers, especially a group of women, watched from a distance. And we're told that about noon, the whole country became in darkness. And this darkness lasted until 3 o'clock when Jesus died. It says that when Jesus died, the veil in the temple in Jerusalem was torn in two. Biblical scholars argue over exactly what that was, the veil in the temple. Nobody really knows exactly what that was or what it was for, but whatever it was torn in two. And it says that the group of people who came to watch the crucifixion, apparently these people were sort of like people that used to watch hangings back in the Old West and get a kick out of it. Instead of getting a kick out of this, it said that they left sorrowful. It also says something else. It says when Jesus died, the earth shook. Rocks broke apart. Graves were opened. And many dead people arose from their graves and were seen throughout Jerusalem. And then it says a man by the name of Joseph of Arimathea went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. He had just had a new tomb hewn out for himself. And he'd said he wanted to bury Jesus in that tomb. And so Pilate agreed, and he got the body and wrapped it up and put it in the tomb and rolled a large rock up to the entrance of the tomb. Now the next day, some of the Jewish leaders went to Pilate and said, this man said if we killed him, he'd rise from the grave. And they said, we could just imagine his followers coming out here stealing the body and then claim he rose from the grave. And so they said, you need to put guards at that tomb to be sure somebody doesn't steal the body. And so Pilate did. He put guards on the tomb. Now these are the events that are commemorated during this coming week, from today through next Saturday. And I want you to realize that this tells us something very, very important about Christianity. Christianity is not a religion based on things people thought up. It's not thoughts about God. Christianity is not a religion of rules and regulations or laws. Christianity is based on events. That is the basis of Christianity, the events of the life of Jesus. These are events that happened, that really happened. And these events are commemorated year after year during this week because these events form the basis and the bedrock of the Christian faith. The death and resurrection of Jesus is the bedrock of the Christian faith.